Alrighty, let's get started. I want to begin. Show of hands, how many of you have heard of the TV show Trailer Park Boys? Anybody? All right. There's an actor, his name is John E. Dunsworth. He plays Mr. Leahy. And towards the end of the series, at least the non-animated version, he has this quote on gratitude that I'd like to share with you all. Actually, I'm muted. There are other.
You know what the best currency is? And I just found out this is the best currency, the most valuable is gratitude. And if when you dance, it's not like something, if you can do something.
So, very short. But in essence, I think what he's trying to say is if you're not grateful for what you have, you're always thinking you're lacking something and you're never going to be happy. You're never going to be fulfilled with what you have. So that is what leads to my attendance question for today, which is what are you thankful for? What are you grateful for? All right, and I will share with you what I am grateful for towards the end, but I don't want to spoil it. So I will begin by asking Stephanie, your parents. And what about your parents? Like what quality makes you thankful for them? Coming to this country, all righty. Very good. Emily, what are you grateful for? Being able to be here, yeah. Having your health, having a mode of transportation to get here, all those sorts of things, There's no wrong answer. Maddie. Your siblings? Yeah, they really change your outlook on things. I'm grateful for mine too. I have an older brother and older sister, and they taught me a lot. Jazz. Your parents? All righty. Anything in particular or just generally?
My mom's ambition.
Ambition. Yeah, totally. It's a very admirable quality. Aiden, what are you thankful for? Food? You like food? Yeah. Can you cook? Not at all? All righty. Abby.
My family.
Your family? All righty. Giselle.
My family.
Your family? Jaylee. Family? Lacey? Friends? Yeah. Friends are important. You don't want to take them for granted. Michael?
My family.
Your family? Armin? What your mom has done for you? Haley?
I'm thankful for like having limbs that work.
Having what?
Limbs, like legs, arms. That's what.
Limbs. That is something to be grateful for. It's something you kind of take for granted, Lily? Your friends? Absolutely. And last but not least, Emily Taylor. Your friends? All righty. Now, this is going to sound pretty cheesy, pretty corny, but what am I thankful for? All of you. When I struggle, and I don't want to keep going, you give me the reason to keep going, and that is something I'm very thankful for. All of you. So yeah, very cheesy, I know. And none of you said you were thankful for me, but that's okay. No, I'm kidding. All right. So, where are we in the semester? I kind of want to share that with you too. And this is not to freak you out or anything. Today's the 29th. It's a leap day. We normally don't have the 29th. This happens every 4 years. Today we're talking about chapter 8, got another 2 chapters to go through. I highly doubt we're gonna take Tuesday, March 12th to also talk about chapter 13, it's delivery. You know, so that might be another informative speech day, we'll have 2 days to prepare the informative. But that doesn't mean you should wait until those 2 days to put any work into this speech, right? If you come with something, then I can help you, but if you come with nothing, I can't help you, you know?
I have a question, would you want to be born on a leap year day?
Probably not.
Well, just think about it, if you do, you're younger.
Yeah, but then you're like 12 when you're 40, you know, it's just sort of, I've known people like that where it's like, oh, it's his 8th birthday, but he's really 32, it's just kind of weird. And they make a joke out of it by having like little kid race cars on their cake and stuff like that, so it's interesting though. All right. So now that we know where we are in the semester, let's go ahead and get started with chapter 8, which is supporting your ideas. Taking the sources that you found and extrapolating information out of them, turning them into something you can give your speech in. So, we already did attendance. There are 3 different types of supporting materials. There are 3 different types of examples you can use. There's statistics, and then there's 2 types of testimony. Statistics, I'm sure you've all heard of mean, median, and mode, so I'm not going to talk too much about that sort of stuff. The types of testimony, quotations and paraphrasing, we're going to kind of look at the difference between those 2. And I'm sure you know the difference. Then we're going to talk about how to orally cite your sources, because you need to have at least 2 oral citations for your informative speech. I can't remember how many you need in your persuasive, I think it's 3 or 4. But we'll have an activity where you're going to try to find some type of example, statistic, or testimony in sources you found on Tuesday, or just brand new sources that you find today. And then you're going to give me an oral citation, an example, you know, and just give me one. Then we'll talk about next class. Any questions about where we're about to be headed? Okay. So, supporting materials. There's examples, statistics, and testimony, right? Let's start by talking about examples. You're using a specific case to illustrate an idea. I gave the example of Matt Stutzman when I gave my recurve archery speech, to sort of say, well, if you ever think you can't do something, think again, because it never stopped this guy. That was a specific example. That was a brief example too. There's brief, extended, and hypothetical. A hypothetical example can be used when you first start your speech, you know. Imagine you're in the middle of the ocean, you know, pretty terrifying thought, but that might be a good way to start your phobia speech if you're afraid of the ocean, you know. Imagine you're surrounded by spiders, that's sort of a hypothetical example. But brief, like it says, you're just referring to something to illustrate a point in passing. It's not like you're taking a long time to talk about it. That differs from an extended example. That might be a story, a narrative, an anecdote, which is just sort of a little story developed at length. You know, like I'm going to tell you a story about this kid, and that kid was me, something like that. And then finally, we have the hypothetical. It's a fictitious situation. It didn't really happen, but you're trying to paint a picture and make it seem like, what if this was the case? You know, imagine a world where no one was homeless. That's a hypothetical example, you know. Okay, so now that we talked about that, let's go on to some tips. Number 1, clarify your idea, because you can't just say, what if? You have to sort of make a point to say, well, this is why what if, you know? This is why I gave you a hypothetical. This is why I'm talking about this person in this story. It helps to reinforce your ideas. It's not a distraction. It doesn't take away from your point. It reinforces your point. If you wanted to say, why should you care about the homeless? You could include testimony from a homeless person. And I'm not saying this to brag, but yesterday I saw a homeless guy. I always pretty much see him on the way home from work. And I usually give him a couple bucks, but I didn't have any singles in my wallet, so I gave him $5, you know? And I'm not, again, saying that to brag, but what he told me was, he said, my feet are really cold. And I didn't blame him, because it was like 34 degrees outside, you know? And I'm able to empathize with that because I've locked myself outside of my Amazon van in 10-degree weather, and that sucked. I had to wait for like an hour, you know? So I can sort of empathize. You can personalize ideas with your examples, because your speech is going to be different than if somebody else gave the same speech, you know? So examples you might find might be the same, but you can personalize them to fit your speech. Find vivid, richly textured examples, you know? You don't want to just say, here's this guy, Billy Bob, you know, and what do you know about Billy Bob? He's a guy, you know, that's not very specific, not very vivid. practice. Because your example is not going to really be that effective if you're going to come up here and this is the first time you're giving your example, right? Just like you should practice your speech, you know, go through it a couple times and at least try to go through the whole speech as if you were up here. So those are some tips for examples. Statistics, 3 different types, like I said, the mean, the median, and the mode, just to sort of give you an idea of averages. The mean, the average value group of numbers. I probably should have thrown some numbers up here and then given you an idea, but you've all been in math, you all know what this means. Who can tell me what an outlier is?
Like, apart.
Yes,
Either over.
absolutely, yes, thank you. If I have numbers like 6, 8, 9, and then 34, 34 would be the outlier. The reason you don't want to specifically use the mean is if you have outliers, because that can skew your whole data. Now, everything is going to be skewed toward that 34 instead of if you did something like median, which is if you had something like 1, 2, 3, 4, let's go to 3, 5, 6, 7, or you had 17, and you had -8. You cancel out those numbers, and then you get to what the median is, which is 4. Right? And I know that seems pretty obvious and redundant, but that gives you an idea of averages. And then finally, we have the mode. And the mode is what number occurs most frequently. Is it 4? Is it 6? Whatever it may be. So, some tips for statistics. Number 1, you use it to quantify your ideas, right? You want to use it to give some scope. How many homeless people are in America? How many people on average suffer from a phobia? That sort of thing. How many children are starving in America? That. You don't want to just use them all over the place though, because it's just too much for the brain to process in 5 minutes. Because you don't want to just bombard your audience with statistics, because then that just sort of gets boring, you know?
Oh, question for you.
Yes.
For speeches, do you want it to be more like provided in like a different version, or do you want it? Like, let's say it's like, has something to do with us, like, it's an example about us, like, can we use an example about ours? You know what I mean? Or is it more so like a third person type of speech?
You can rely on your own personal knowledge, but you want to try to pull from outside too, because that makes you more credible. It looks like you did your research instead of I'm just talking out of my butt right now, you know? So, identify sources, because you can't just throw a graph on the screen and not say, where did this information come from, right? Did you make this graph? Did it come from a reputable organization? Because statistics can be skewed, all right? They can be biased and they can make it seem like this is the case when it's not really the case. And you want to explain it too. You can't just throw it up there and be like, here's a graph. All right, now moving on. You get to sort of like, why did you put it in your speech? You know, why that graph of all the different types of graphs that could be related to your speech? It doesn't have to be a graph either. It doesn't have to be visual. It can be a statistic or what have you. And you want to round off. You don't want to say there's 1,526,382. Just say there's about 1 million, over 1 million, you know? It's a lot shorter, and then you don't have to spend so much time in that figure. You could just say over 1 million people experience this instead of the specific number. And then use visual aids if needed, right? If you're giving a speech about phobias, you probably shouldn't put the phobia on the screen in case somebody has that phobia, because then your audience isn't going to be thinking about your speech. They're just going to be freaked out for the rest of the speech, and rightfully so. Any questions about statistics? All right, let's move on to talking about testimony. It's like if you were in a courtroom. Somebody gives a testimony of what happened. And there are 2 different types, but they are quotations or paraphrases used to support a point. The 2 different types are peer testimony and expert testimony. Let's start with peer testimony. Ordinary people, firsthand experience and insight, right? If you wanted to ask a college student about what's their experience at Gateway, that would be an example of peer testimony. They are your peer, right? But if you wanted to go a step further, maybe add a little bit more credibility, that's when expert testimony comes in. Doctors, lawyers, experts in their field, scientists. You can say, this person from this organization says this, and that enhances your credibility because you found that information. Direct quotes, pretty self-explanatory. It's word for word. You don't change anything. You say, according to this person from this organization on this date, here's what they said. Oh, and in this form, in an interview, in an article, whatever. And you don't want to use quotes out of context because you can distort these things and make it seem like that's what the news does all the time. You know, like, oh, this many people got stabbed today, you know, or this many people got attacked by sharks. But shark attacks are less dangerous than, you know, lightning strikes. More people get hit by lightning than sharks. So you don't want to use that out of context. Because you're kind of manipulating your audience. They didn't do the research like you did, and this really comes in handy for persuasive speeches. If you're trying to persuade somebody, you don't want to distort information. It's unethical. Paraphrase. It's just restating it in your own words, right? You would still say, according to this person, on this date, on this article, whatever, but you'd sort of work it to where it works for you, right? So what are some tips for testimony? Make sure you're accurate when you're giving these quotes and paraphrases. Like if you want to do it word for word, make sure you include every word, you know? Use qualified sources. Again, not according to Wikipedia, because like Michael said, anybody can edit on Wikipedia, right? It's not a qualified source. But if you say, according to this expert in the field, this is what they say, and that's qualified. An unbiased source, that kind of ties into this too, because if they're trying to make it seem like things are better or worse than it is, that's biased, you know? And then finally, tell me where your source came from. You don't want to just say, there are 8 million polar bears. Like, okay, where did you get that information? You know, is this UNICEF that told you this? Is it Wikipedia that told you this? Where did you find this info? Now, the most important part of this lecture, right? Citing your sources orally. When I'm listening to your speech, there are 4 things that I'm going to be trying to pay attention to. Number 1, the name of the document. Is it a news article? Did it come from a newspaper? Is it a journal article? What type of source is it? Number 2, the author or sponsoring organization. Was this UNICEF? I'm just struggling to come up with examples. Was this the American Dental Association? Was the American Diabetes Association? And then who sponsored it, if that's applicable? But if you give the author, you also want to give qualifications, right? You don't just throw the name Joe Smith out there. Joe Smith, who's been studying dinosaurs for 20 years, said in this document on this date, right? Those are the 4 things you're looking for. And here's the thing. These can be interchangeable. It really just depends on the source that you have. You can say on April 19th, 2019, this person who is this in a document or in an interview said, and then you give the information in either a paraphrase or a direct quote, right? So very important you have all 4 of these. Let me give you an example, and you can see that I've highlighted these to show you that is where it is. This is the type of article. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune is a newspaper. According to this, of January 29th, 2018, the date, because if it's from 1967, there's probably new information, right? And then Chris Nowinski. Nobody knows who Chris Nowinski is. That's why you have to give a qualification after the fact to say they're the co-founder of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. They give a direct quote on the dangers of youth tackle football. Children were never intended to be hit in the head 500 times in 3 months every year while their brain is going through incredible development, right? Don't put your quote on the screen. If you have visual aids, use pictures, use graphs, whatever. But you don't want to just turn around and read the quote instead of having it on your note card right here, because then you can sort of make eye contact. It feels a little bit more fluid and natural. If you wanted to paraphrase this, you could do this by saying, all this stuff in the top here, and then something like, while children are going through development, they really shouldn't be getting head injuries. Again, you're just trying to give the broad strokes of this quote. You don't have to give it in its entirety and its exactness, but it is entirely up to you. If you want to try to make your speech a little longer, you can give direct quotations, but it's not necessary. You can paraphrase. What questions do you guys have about oral citations? Anything? Okay. I'll go back for a second so you again know, was it a newspaper? Was it an article? Who wrote it? Why did you pick them? what makes this person qualified, and then give the date, all right? Because a lot of the times you'll find a news article or on a web page where there's the person who wrote the article, but you might not necessarily find what makes the person who wrote that article qualified. But there might be an interview in that article, and that's information you could pull from. However, when you put your document in the bibliography, you would include who wrote it, not where that information came from, not, who gave that quote. So, for this source here, I did try to find the source online. And I wasn't able to find the exact quote, but there is still some information here that is useful. So, get out of here. Zoom in. Advertisement, oh my goodness. Oh. All right, hopefully this works. So there's a lot of information here. One thing is Brett Favre. He had a documentary. So if you wanted to give this quotation, you could say, according to, those are the most two important words, because then my antenna tune in to when you say according to. That means I know you're about to give a citation, right? That's the easiest way to tell me, hey, I'm about to cite a source. And that's what your audience can pick up on too, not just me. According to, okay, I'm ready. Who's about to say this? According to Brett Favre, right? What makes Brett Favre qualified? He was in the Hall of Fame, right? According to Brett Favre, former quarterback for anybody? He played for two teams? It doesn't say on here, but Minnesota Vikings and then the Green Bay Packers. Yeah, those are the two teams that I know of that he played for. So, according to Brett Favre, former quarterback for two NFL teams, you could say both, or you could just say that. In the documentary, Shocked, a hidden factor in the sports concussion crisis, he says the turf is to blame. So, Favre cites the turf, especially old, less forgiving kind, as a cause for most of his brain injuries through his NFL record, 297 consecutive starts. So you don't have to give that quote as a direct quote. You can just say, according to Brett Favre, former Hall of Famer in the NFL, and then he suffered a concussion in the TCF Bank Stadium in 2010. So there isn't exactly a date here for that, but what you can do, it says January. January of what year, right? Shocked, a hidden factor in the sports concussion crisis. Let's just Google that. Search the web. Okay, so right here, boom. This is when it was put on YouTube in 2017. And it might even give you more information about. Okay. And this is just a trailer though. So this is the trailer. It doesn't tell you, oh, this is when it came out. This is just when the trailer was put on YouTube. But you can cite YouTube videos. It's not like it's just limited to this. But you'd have to say when the video was published, or whatever information comes in. So, new documentary shows artificial turf plays a role. For Favre to do. The idea for Shocked began in March of 2017. So, you don't have to give me the exact date. It's not like in January 27th, 2018 or 2017. You can just say in the documentary from March of 2017, that gives me the date. It tells me when the information came about. That's what's important. So here's another one. Who is taking steps to stave off the symptoms of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Dr. James Kelly, who is studying concussions in the military, and Dan Sawyer, CEO of Rock USA, the leading manufacturer of shock pad technology. That's the qualification, right? Nobody knows who Dan Sawyer is until you give some information saying, this is why Dan Sawyer is important for my speech. The manufacturer of shock pad technology for artificial fields in America. And then he gives his quote. Brett and I got to talking about the field and how important it is to player safety. You could say that, or you could say, since the final play of his career ended with him being knocked out from his head hitting artificial turf, the idea that the field is a piece of safety equipment really resonated with him, and he wanted to help spread the word that these fields could be made safer. If you're talking about this, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that would be a good thing to put in your speech, right? Or if you just want to talk about youth football in America, you could talk about that too. But you can also paraphrase by saying, in his final game, Brett Favre got a concussion, and he said that the turf field played a factor. That's a paraphrase, right? You're still conveying similar information without having to do a direct quote. Does that make the sense? The difference between paraphrasing and direct quotation? Okay. Now, what are you going to do? What you're going to do is, from Tuesday, you found a couple of sources. You can use those or you can use new ones. I want you to try to give me an example source, a brief, extended, or hypothetical, right? I want you to try to find a statistic of some kind. It doesn't have to be mean, median, or mode. These are just examples of statistics. But like 1 in 3 people suffer from this. That's a statistic, right? And then you can find a testimony. The examples that I just gave you were testimonies. And some of them were expert testimonies, not all of them, no. I want you to think about how you would cite each one of those in your speech, because what I'm going to ask you to do after that is give me an example of a citation. If you were up here citing the source, what would it look like, right? And make sure you include those 4 things that I was very adamant about. What type of source, who wrote it, what qualifications, if any, and then the date, right? If you can't find anything except a year, that's fine. You know, just give me some frame of reference for when this information comes out. So right now it is 9:58. I'll give you about 20 minutes, 22 minutes. So at 10:20, I'm going to ask you to give me one citation from one of those sources. All right? Have at it. And I'm up here to answer any questions you have. Okay. So I'm going to give you some examples of what I found online, because I know that either Abby or Maddie wanted to talk. No, Maddie wanted to talk about phobias, and Abby wanted to talk about Gypsy Rose. So I decided to do a little bit of tertiary research into that subject. I found this article. Gypsy Blanchard, aka Gypsy Rose, gets 10 years for murdering her mother. All right, that was the name of the article. And then I try to find some information in here, but it gives me the name of the author, Harrison Keegan, and then the date that it was published, July 5th, 2016. So what information did I find in here? A couple things. Number one, this is how I would give the source citation in my outline. Zoom in a little bit more. According to an online article published by the Springfield News Leader in July 2016, Gypsy Blanchard was given a 10-year sentence for the second-degree murder of her mother, Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard, 48. And then at the end, I put Keegan, the last name of the author. This tells me which source your information came from. When you give your speech, you don't say this part. That is just the in-text citation in your outline that says this information came from this article, all right? Notice how there's no quotations here except for Dee Dee. It's because this is a paraphrase, right? The actual information was right here. She'll be eligible for parole before her 33rd birthday after admitting to her role in the June 2015 stabbing of her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard. But I also included what was above that. She got a 10-year sentence, the minimum for a second-degree murder charge. I took both of those pieces of information and put them into that one bit. A 10-year sentence for the second-degree murder of her mother, Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard. Okay? That's how you would paraphrase that. But let me give you a direct quote example. according to an online article published by the Springfield News Leader in 2016, Gypsy Blanchard was given a 10-year sentence for the second-degree murder of her mother. But actually, that's the same thing. But let's say I couldn't find the name of the author. I couldn't find Keegan. Okay, I would put the name of the article in extraordinary case. Gypsy Blanchard gets 10 years for murdering her mother, 2016. All right, it still gives me some information to say that's where the information came from. Put it in parentheticals, not quotations. I don't know why I did that. And then finally, this is a testimony, okay? And this is a direct quote. According to an online article published, and according to an online article entitled, "In an Extraordinary Case, Gypsy Blanchard, blah, blah, blah," published on July 5th, 2016. I'm giving you the name of the article, what type of information it is, like where, what was it, and then the date. Mike Stanfield, Gypsy Blanchard's attorney, so it tells you who said this and what makes them credible. It's her attorney, that's pretty credible. Essentially, Gypsy's mother was holding her prisoner. Her mother would not allow her to spend any time with any other human being, okay? For that right there, I still put Keegan 2016, but in the actual thing here, this is what it is. It says Stanfield said right here. What did I do? I cut that out and I put 3 dots right there. That's how you can connect quotes like that. You can have the first part of the quote and then the next part of the quote with the call to ellipses, 3 dots. But I also looked at phobias. And I don't know if I would include this, but this is good to give a definition. According to an online article from Johns Hopkins Medicine, what makes Johns Hopkins Medicine credible? All right. I didn't find this information from that article. I had to do some more research to find out. It's one of the top medical schools in the country. Boom. Qualifications. The only problem is there's no date for this article. So at the end, I just put, and there's no author. It's just the organization who put out that information. So if I go to the webpage that I found it on right here, it gives me a lot of good information. The only problem is there's no date. There's no author, okay? And that's not a huge deal because Johns Hopkins kind of pulls the weight for you here, all right? You know it's a top medical establishment, so if you give any more quotations, I would say it's passable. 3 out of 4 ain't bad, right? I still have the name of the article. As long as I can find this information myself, or so the audience can find the information. We want to fact check you, and that's how we do that. Another good statistic in here, 19 million Americans have 1 or more that range from mild to severe. That's something else you can put in your speech if you had a speech on phobias. There are 2 different types, specific and social. So, a lot of good info. But then I put it in the works cited here. And this is from the article I found, Keegan Harrison, the name of the article, Springfield News Leader, the publisher, July 5th July 2016, and then the URL, right? You could also put the date that it was accessed to, but, so if I go to my other citation list, it says right here, missing info, right? Because it didn't have everything that it needed to have to complete the citation. It just says phobias, name of the article, Johns Hopkins Medicine, and then the URL because that's all I could find. Try to find sources with all the information, okay? But how would I quote that? According to an online article from Johns Hopkins, top medical school, phobias are defined as uncontrollable, irrational, and lasting fear of a certain object, situation, or activity. That's not plagiarism. It'd be plagiarism if I didn't include quotation marks, if I didn't say where information came from. If I just said a phobia is defined as, and then that, I would technically be plagiarizing that article because I'm not getting credit where it's due. Okay? So now that I've given you some examples, I want to hear what you found. All right, anybody want to share? Any information, any citation?
I'll go.
Okay,
You want me to stand or sit?
you can do either. I'd hear you better if you stood though.
According to an online article, a backstage sneak peek into Tex Peters Halloween written by lead actors and Peter the Starcatcher, Kat Shelton, and Hope Reiser, written on January 27th, 2023. Halloween is a week before a production where actors do full run-throughs of a show for hours on end and fix any issues that come up last minute.
Okay, excellent. Did y'all pick up on how all 4 of those things were mentioned? You know, I got the date, I got the type of source that it was, who wrote it, and then what made them qualify. right? Very nice work. Anybody else? Harmon, yeah.
According to my article in 1918 between method and execution, Bo Lucy, name, it's a firsthand experience of how he killed Romanovs. It was published on January 1st, 1970, in the Claimant's Quarterly.
Okay.
And publications, he was the one who planned it. No, I was someone told him to do it, but he made it plan out how it would.
Okay. And then what information would you like say, like 48 stabs or like what?
They shot, at first they were gonna shoot all of them in the head, then one shot was fired at the long and so. They started firing randomly, they couldn't kill the girls, all the daughters were, got report stats, so they had bands.
Okay, there we go. It tells you where the information came from, all that, what makes them a qualified source, and then what the information actually is. This was the plan, didn't go according to plan, this is what happened. All right, very good on it. Anybody else want to give me an oral citation example? Or a statistic or something like that? Can anybody tell me their topic? I know some people's topics already, but what's your topic?
The top,
Is what?
top.
Top companies in the world? Okay, Aiden, what's your topic? Don't know yet. Michael, what's your topic?
Why President Biden was unable to fulfill his promises during his campaign.
Okay.
His presidency.
Okay. Got it. All right. Julie, what do you got?
I don't really know yet, talking about the
Oh, okay. Got a lot of information. Documentaries, probably all kinds of stuff. Jazz, what's your topic?
The effects of technology.
Oh, physically, mentally, maybe even spiritually, very good. Stephanie, what's your topic?
But I can't really find an article. Who said it?
Okay. You can probably still say, like, according to this zoo.
Can I say that?
Yeah. Like, because there's somebody.
I
so-
wrote some, but. Like, I wrote.
I mean,
But for instance, say we get a Zoom, acting this high rates. 24 to this website, and I got 4.4 in this. But I don't know, it's,
it's okay, as long as you're giving me where it came from. According to the San Diego Zoo, this information, it's not just the African penguin is this tall. Okay, who said that, so like, if you don't have all of that stuff, it's kind of okay, as long as you got at least one. Or I think the most important is the title sources. So like, was it an online article? Was it a newspaper? Was it, what's the word? A press conference, like, that sort of thing, but still good with me. I'm sure you can make speech. Giselle,
I think.
butterflies?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, monarchs, like
Yeah.
monarch butterflies, okay, because I think butterflies is very broad. topic,
Yeah.
like, kind of everything. Good. Emily?
I'm going to do mine about what called the sale of drugs.
What causes sandwich house? Oh. If you have trouble finding like what caused it, because I know it was the malt, right, from the bread that caused hallucinations, and you found out there.
Yep.
Yeah, you could say, if that's not enough, you could say, so what were they? Like, what were the sandwich trials? Why did they happen? And then another main point might be like, so why does this matter? Like, why fear mongering is a thing, like the crucible, by whoever came up with that, he wrote about that in his play, you can touch on that if you wanted to, but yeah, definitely gotta get top. Lacey,
childhood adversity.
how did what?
Adversity.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Or you can just sub that to trauma if that's the word you wanted to use, but there you go. Lily,
I wanted to do something with acting again, because that would be easy for me,
right,
but then I'm also like that. Because I want to do something.
is there any particular director that you fancy? Or like, is there any play, anything like that?
No, I can do the show legally on.
Legally, yeah. You just gotta find the right way to break it down, because you can't talk about the whole thing in 5 minutes. You could say like, here's how many awards it won. You know, that could be something, or you could say, because I'm kind of familiar with that musical, but. Yeah, that's a good time. You know, if you wanted to say, I'm gonna tell you about Legally Blonde in these 3 minutes, whatever those are. Emily?
The different quadrants and then.
Round awards? Okay, excellent, yeah. So there's a lot of good examples there. There you go, Michael, okay. Good stuff, everyone. And it's okay if you're having some hesitations about your topic choice, but you have to give these speeches in less than a month. That's why I'm trying to get the ball rolling, trying to get you to find some sources, how you would cite that information from there, etc. Okay? All right, y'all are free to go. Good work today, everyone.